La di da di da di da di da. What a lovely day it is today. I'm not having a good time. I'm not having a good time at all. It's fine. It's fine. It's just like I'm just like so stressed out, man. I'm so stressed out. Like this what I'm working on right now is just so annoying. But yeah, so today I'm going to be working on the TRS. The TRSs for entities. Well, we already have the TRSs for entities, but I need to... Basically, each entity here is going to, instead of having this, it's going to instead point to a root node. And we have to figure out... Yeah, basically, everything is now inside of inside of the GLTF convention, right? So everything has to correspond to a node or a skin or whatever, because that's just the way it works. That's just the way it goes, you know. So we have a sprite here. Interesting. Okay, so instance ID int node. What's interesting is that I did say mesh ID here, but I don't think we actually care about a mesh ID. I don't think so. I think an entity just has an instance ID and then the node inside of it. Yeah. I don't think we need this. I don't think we need it. Well, I guess it is kind of important, but because you do kind of want a way to get to, like, if you're selecting an entity in the editor mode, you kind of need to know what... Hey Dark, what's up? What's a part of it? But I mean, it could have multiple... An entity could have multiple meshes. So I'd say for now, let's just not deal with that. We need an ability to get a node. A node. Oh man, how do I do that? Well, we can just try loading a GLTF in first of all. Like, I was thinking... Yeah. You're good playing around with Vulcan? That's cool. Yeah, I was thinking, like... If I want a button that makes an entity, for example, it would have to make a new node and make a new skin. Like... Like, it becomes really, really annoying because you would have to load everything in from GLTF. Like, you couldn't just, like, duplicate inside of my engine. You can't just duplicate, you can't just duplicate models and stuff, like, within the editor. The reason why is because you need a skin and node, you need skins and nodes for those things. Oh, that's tough. That is tough. That is tough indeed. That is tough. Yeah, I don't really know. That's difficult. I mean, like, if we just loaded in something, then we would have a node ID for it, but that's tough. How do we do this? We just create a new node. Yeah, we could create a new node. Let me see my update loop for that to see if we can do that. Update scene nodes. Update node global. If nodes.parent equals -1. Oh, you waved this time. Hey, Arya, how are you? I'm so happy. I'm so happy about the wave. I'm glad you're bringing it back. Do you know how to do any of this shit, Arya? With nodes and transformation matrices and all that good stuff. I'm just like... Yeah, so I think if we update scene nodes for instance node, if we don't have a parent. So basically, right, if you were to have a one node entity with just one model matrix, like no fancy joints and anything like that, then all you would have to do, if you click a button that says create entity mesh, right, then you would just need another node. Just need another node. And then you would have to tell a render group which node it needs to bind as its model matrix, right? It's very, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds pretty good. What are the nodes? They're GLTF nodes. So in GLTF you have skins and you have nodes. So nodes are kind of just like this recursive like tree, right? That they all influence each other, right? So if a node is parented to another node, when you compute the transformation matrix for the bottom node, it takes into account the parent node's matrix. Does that make sense? You multiply it times the parent. And so that's kind of what it is, right? That's how you animate skeletons, right? Is there just a bunch of nodes. The issue that I'm running into is like, how do I, like, so if let's say we have an entity, right? Like an enemy, right? And we load it in from GLTF and we get this enemy and we have all of his nodes and his skin and his blah 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 blah. How do we get a second one? You know what I mean? Like, it becomes so incredibly difficult because all of these all point to specific nodes. Their joint counts go to specific nodes, right? and then they all have their inverse bind matrix that needs to be applied. So if I was to, within my engine, make a button that, for example, duplicates this entity, I would need to duplicate all of that node data, all of that skin data, make a new skin, and then have that skin's joints point to completely new nodes, right? And I would have to wire all of that up, which is incredibly painful, like, and overwhelming, that task, to do that. I'm just trying to think, like, what's the easiest way to do this, because, like, wait, so you just have a huge global array with random nodes shuffled? Not really. They have instances. Which are basically models. So I could technically make a new instance, right? I could just, like, copy the instance. The issue is that an instance isn't guaranteed to have just the model inside. Like, for example, if you load in a map, right? Like, for my example, right, if I load in my map with my weapons, right, that all gets pushed into one instance. And that's not my fault. That's the fault of the fucking, the file format, to be honest. Is that there's no way to really separate it unless you load everything in separate files. Which I guess you could just do. But, yeah. But no, I don't have a huge global array. I have these instances have their own nodes and their own skins. But yeah, the reason why that's a thing is because for example, in Blender, you should transform the data such that you can use it more easily. I mean, that's very true. I wish that there was a way to do that, to be honest. You know? It's not really up to me, you know? It's not really up to me. Like, when it comes down to it, the GLTF stuff is not really up to me. Can't you just store a single node? Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. It's here, right? The node ID and the instance ID. That's a thing. They have a parent ID on all the nodes. They have a parent node ID. And if it doesn't have a parent, then it's -1, which is what I was just showing off here. But the issue, right, is that I want to make it so that you don't have to load in a GLTF every time you want a new entity, right? Could reversing this whole thing work? So each node stores children, so you could just store the oldest node. Each node also stores children. That's how the recursion works. Yeah, this is difficult because it's basically like traversing up a binary tree. Like, the issue isn't just traversing the nodes, it's when you're just duplicating. It's when, so, to assign a node to an entity, right? if I load in a GLTF, we can probably get that node. We can probably figure out what is the parent node for this entity, right? But my issue is, like, if within my editor, we want to not load in a GLTF every time I spawn a new entity, I have to duplicate this data, right? So, like, the easiest way to do this, right, is just, like, duplicate the instance. But if I duplicate the instance, there's no guarantee that it's only duplicating the data for that entity. Does this make sense? So if I want to duplicate a node, the entity's node, right? This would mean it would need its own skin, okay? It would need its own skin. There is no guarantee that that skin's joints only point to that node. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, so this skin has joints, right, that all point to nodes, right? So if I duplicate the entity node, do you see what I'm saying? It would need a new skin that only points to the entity's node, because there's no guarantee that a skin doesn't have more than the entity in it during load time. Example of this. The geometry in my map gets the same skin as the first weapon. Right? And that's how the file format works. It only spawns skins for necessary when it's necessary, right? So the geometry, even though it doesn't have an animation, has a skin attached to it with the same skin ID as the first weapon. What exactly are skins? So skin is you can think of it like the skin on a skeleton, right? So a skin is the thing that holds all of it together, right? It has an inverse bind matrix, and that is basically what it iterates through all of the nodes and then multiplies it times that to get the final matrix that we bind during runtime. The inverse bind matrix, as far as I'm still a bit cloudy on like why the inverse bind thing exists, but it's like basically the root position for all of the nodes, as far as I understand it, right? Everything needs to get multiplied by that at the end by all of its joins. So we compute. So for example here. So if we update scene nodes, if a node dot parent equals -1, let's say if entity, right, we want to like translate this, so we translate this node, right, and then we apply that translation to this TRS. Now, on the skin side, which gets done after, it takes that matrix and then it multiplies it times the inverse bind matrix that is stored on the skin, which is required for all of the animation stuff. So yeah, it's really fucking complicated. Like it's really fucking complicated. So yeah, like even if I get on here an instance and a node ID, which is totally possible, and then we just translate the node, I don't really know. Also, I don't have a way like to make an entity. Right now I just load in meshes as meshes, right? Yes, you have a transform tree as matrices. These transform bones, which are in turn are mapped to vertices. Not well. Mapped to vertices is, you know, an interesting way of putting it. They are at the end wired to vertices, but those vertices aren't what are transformed. The matrices are sent straight to the GPU. For example, if I go into my weapon.vert, we can see exactly what this is, right? So each mesh has a joint index, has joint indices and a weight, right? So it can have a maximum of 4 joint indices, which are going to influence its position during the frame, right? So it takes in 4 different joint matrices, not just one. So that's how it works. It isn't mapped to vertices. It's mapped to a mesh, which is influenced by more than just one joint. So it gets pretty complicated because there's a lot of data that needs to change if we just duplicate an entity. And not to mention the fact that we don't even have a way. This whole like thought process started because I was like, okay, if I want to make a button, if I want to, for example, let's just do a build real quick. If I can load in. Okay, well, this is annoying me. So if I have a I can load in GLTFs now, fine, right? Like I can load in models, fine, and they get their own instance. The issue is if I want to make that an entity. For example, if I just want to make a button that makes all the selected triangles into an entity, it becomes